We're going to continue our progress through the history of Protestantism and pick up where we left off last time. As I said in the last hour, these are available if you go to my website, nicklasarthur.wordpress.com, and click on the free bookstore tab. You'll scroll down, you'll find the books there. Go to Amazon, leave a review, or buy the book. If you want to follow along and get the free edition, you can go to archive.org and you can look up the history of Protestantism, or just put in James A. Wylie, the author's names. That's Jawyle, and you can get the version on your computer to follow along if you would like to do that. I think I'm going to try this. I'm going to go to, I have this slideshow. These are the wood block prints that are in the book itself. And so I'm just going to put these on a slideshow. And if you're reading along, you can read along. But most people are just listening. So, and I think for the recording, this would be better than just looking at my big face. And that way I can follow, I can read, and I think we'll see how this works out. Let me know what you guys think anyway. But let's pick up back where we left off. We were in chapter 3 of the book, book first. That's the way they're written. Book first, chapter 3, development of the papacy from Constantine. Okay. I'm going to back up to the beginning of the chapter where I left off. The first of the Gothic princes to enter the Roman communion was Clovis, king of the Franks, in fulfillment of a vow which he had made on the field of Tobiac, where he vanquished the Alemanni. Clovis was baptized in the Cathedral of Rheims, 496. With every circumstance of solemnity which could impress a sense of the awfulness of the rite on the minds of its rude proselytes. 3,000 of his warlike subjects were baptized along with him. The Pope styled him the eldest son of the Church, with a title which was regularly adopted by all the subsequent kings of France. When Clovis ascended from the baptismal font, he was the only as well as the eldest son of the Church, for he alone, of all the new chiefs that now governed the West, had as yet submitted to the baptismal rite. Notice here that the reign of the papacy had its pronounced beginning in the same place from which its end would spring, with the French Revolution. Continuing. The threshold once crossed, others were not slow to follow. In the next century, the sixth, the Burgundians of southern Gaul, the Visigoths of Spain, the Suevi of Portugal, and the Anglo-Saxons of Britain entered the Pale of Rome. In the 7th century, the disposition was still growing more among the princes of Western Europe to submit themselves and refer their disputes to the pontiff as their spiritual father. National assemblies were held twice a year under the sanction of the bishops. The prelates made use of these gatherings to procure enactments favorable to the propagation of the faith as held by Rome. These assemblies were first encouraged, then enjoined by the Pope, who came in this way to be regarded as a sort of father or protector of the states of the West. Accordingly, we find Sigismund, king of Burgundy, ordering, 554, that an assembly should be held for the future on the 6th of September every year, at which time the ecclesiastics are not so much engrossed with the worldly cares of husbandry. The ecclesiastical conquest of Germany was in this century completed, and thus the spiritual dominions of the popes were still farther extended. In the 8th century, there came a moment of supreme peril to Rome. At almost one and the same time, she was menaced by two dangers, which which threatened to sweep her out of existence, but which, in their issue, contributed to strengthen her dominion. On the west, the victorious Saracens, having crossed the Pyrenees and overrun the south of France, were watering their steeds at the Lorry, and threatening to descend upon Italy and plant the crescent in the room of the cross. On the north, the Lombards, who under Albion had established themselves in central Italy 2 centuries before, had burst the barrier of the Apennines and were brandishing their swords at the gates of Rome. They were on the point of replacing Catholic orthodoxy with the creed of Arianism. Having taken advantage of the iconoclast disputes to throw off the imperial yoke, the Pope could expect no aid from the Emperor of Constantinople. He turned his eyes to France. The prompt and powerful interposition of the Frankish arms saved the papal chair, now in extreme jeopardy. The intrepid Charles Martel drove back the Saracens, 732, and Pepin, the mayor of the palace, son of Charles Martel, who had just seized the throne and needed the papal sanction to color his usurpation, with equal promptitude hastened to the Pope's help, Stephen II, against the Lombards, 754. Having vanquished them, he placed the keys of their own towns upon the altar of St. Peter, and so laid the first foundation of the Pope's temporal sovereignty. Yet the more illustrious sons of Pepin, Charlemagne, had to repeat the service in the Pope's behalf. The Lombards becoming again troublesome, Charlemagne subdued them a second time. After his campaign he visited Rome, 774. The youth of the city, bearing olive and palm branches, met him at the gates. The Pope and clergy received him in the vestibule of St. Peter's, and entering into the sepulchre where the bones of the apostles lie, he finally ceded to the pontiff the territories of the conquered tribes. It was in this way that Peter obtained his patrimony, and the Church her dowry, and the Pope his triple crown. The Pope had now attained 2 of the 3 grades of power that constitute his stupendous dignity. He had made himself a bishop of bishops, head of the Church, and he had become a crowned monarch. Did this content him? No, he said, I will ascend to the sides of the mount. I will plant my throne above the stars. I will be as God. Not content with being a bishop of bishops, and so governing the whole spiritual affairs of Christendom, he aimed at becoming a king of kings, and so of governing the whole temporal affairs of the world. He aspired to supremacy, sole, absolute, and unlimited. This alone was wanting to complete that colossal fabric of power, the popedom, and towards this the pontiff then began to subscribe. And towards this the pontiff then began to strive. Some of the arts had recourse too, in order to grasp the coveted dignity, were of an extraordinary kind. An astounding document, purporting to have been written in the 4th century, although unheard of until the 8th century, was brought out of the darkness in which it had been so long suffered to remain. It was the donation, or testament of the Emperor Constantine. Constantine, says the legend, found Sylvester in one of the monasteries on Mount Soracte, and having mounted him on a mule, he took hold of his bridle rein, and walking all the way on foot, the emperor conducted Sylvester to Rome, and placed him on the papal throne. But this was as nothing compared with the vast and splendid inheritance which Constantine conferred on him, as the following quotation from the deed of gift to which we have reference will show. Quote, "We attribute to the See of Peter all the dignity, all the glory, all the authority of the imperial power. Furthermore, we give to Sylvester and to his successors our palace of the Lateran, which is incontestably the finest palace on earth. We give him our crown, our mitre, our diadem, and all our imperial vestments. We transfer to him the imperial dignity. We bestow on the Holy Pontiff in free gift the city of Rome, and all the western cities of Italy. To cede precedence to him, we divest ourselves of our authority over all those provinces, and we withdraw from Rome, transferring the seat of our empire to Byzantium, inasmuch as it is not proper that an earthly emperor should preserve the least authority where God hath established the head of his religion. That rare piece of modesty on this part of the popes to keep this invaluable document beside them for 400 years and never say a word about it, an equally admirable policy of selecting the darkness of the 8th century as the fittest time for its publication, to quote, "It is to refute it." It was probably forged a little before AD 754, the 8th century. It was composed to repel the Lombards on the one side and the Greeks on the other, and to influence the mind of Pepin. In it, Constantine is made to speak in the Latin of the 18th century, and to address Bishop Sylvester as Prince of the Apostles, Vicar of Christ, and as having authority over the 4 great thrones, not yet set up, of Antioch, Alexandria, Jerusalem, and Constantinople. It was probably written by a priest of the Lateran Church, and it gained its object. That is, it led Pepin to bestow on the Pope the Exarchate of Ravenna, with 20 towns to furnish oil for the lamps of the Roman churches. During more than 600 years, Rome impressively cited this deed of gift, inserted it in her codes, permitted none to question its genuineness, and burned those who refused to believe in it. The first dawn of light in the 16th century sufficed to discover the cheat. In the following century, another document of a like extraordinary character was given to the world. We refer to the Decretals of Isidore. These were concocted about the year 854. They profess to be a collection of letters, rescripts, and bulls of the early pastors of the Roman Church, Anacletus, Clement, and others down to Sylvester, the very men to whom the terms rescript and bull were unknown. The burden of this compilation was the pontifical supremacy, which it affirmed had existed from the first age. It was the clumsiest, but the most successful of all the forgeries which have emanated from what the Greeks had reproachfully termed the native home of inventions and falsifications of documents. The writer, who professed to be living in the 1st century, painted the Church of Rome in the magnificence which he had attained only in the 9th, and made the pastors of the First Age speak in the pompous words of the popes of the Middle Ages. Abounding in absurdities, contradictions, and anachronisms, it affords a measure of the intelligence of the age that accepted it as authentic. It was eagerly laid hold of by Nicklas I to prop up and extend the fabric of his power. Both his successors made it the arsenal from which they drew their weapons of attack against both bishops and kings. It became the foundation of the canon law, and continues to be so, although there is not now a popish writer who does not acknowledge it to be a piece of imposture. Never, says Father de Rignon, was there seen a forgery so audacious, so extensive, so solemn, so persevering. Yet the discovery of the fraud has not shaken the system. The learned Dupin supposes that these decretals were fabricated by Benedict, a deacon of Mainz, who was the first to publish them, and that, to give them a greater currency, he prefixed to them the name of Isidore, a bishop who flourished in Seville in the 7th century. Without the pseudo-Isidore, says Janus, there could have been no Gregory VII. The Isidorian forgeries were the broad foundation which the Gregorians built upon. All the while the papacy was working on another line for the emancipation of its chief from interference and control, whether on the side of the people or on the side of the kings. In early times, the bishops were elected by the people. By and by, they came to be elected by the clergy, with consent of the people, but gradually the people were excluded from all share in the matter. In the first Eastern Church, and then in the Western, all traces of popular election were found at Milan so late as the 11th century. The election of the Bishop of Rome in the early times was in no way different from that of the other bishops. That is, he was chosen by the people. Next, the consent of the emperors came to be necessary to the validity of the popular choice. Then the emperor alone elected the pope. Next, the cardinals claimed a voice in the matter. They elected and presented the object of their choice to the emperor for confirmation. Last of all, the cardinals took the business entirely into their own hands. Thus, the way was gradually paved for the full emancipation and absolute supremacy of the papacy. Chapter 4. The papacy from Gregory VII to Boniface VIII. The War of Investitures. Gregory VII and Henry IV. The Mitre triumphs over the empire. Noon of the papacy under Innocent III. Continued to Boniface VIII. First and last estate of the Roman pastors contrasted. 7 centuries of continuous success. Interpreted by some as proof that the papacy is divine. Seasons explaining this marvelous success. Eclipsed by the gospel's progress. We now come to the last great struggle. There lacked one grade of power to compete. There lacked one grade of power to complete and crown this stupendous fabric of dominion. The spiritual supremacy was achieved in the 7th century. The temporal sovereignty was attained in the 8th. It wanted only the pontifical supremacy, sometimes, although improperly, styled the temporal supremacy, to make the Pope supreme over kings, as he had already become over peoples and bishops, and to vest in him a jurisdiction that has not its like on earth, a jurisdiction that is unique, inasmuch as it arrogates all power, absorbs all rights, and spurns all limits, destined, before terminating its career, to crush between its iron foot thrones and nations, and masking an ambition as astute as Lucifer's with a dissimulation as profound. This power advanced at first with noiseless steps, and stole upon the world as night steals upon it. But, as it neared the goal, its strides grew longer and swifter, until at last it vaulted over the throne of monarchs into the seat of God. This great war we shall now proceed to consider. When the popes, at an early stage, claimed to be the vicars of Christ, they virtually challenged that boundless jurisdiction of which their proudest era beheld them in actual possession. But they knew that it would be imprudent, indeed impossible, as yet to assert it in actual fact. Their motto was, discerning the harvest in the seed. They were content, meanwhile, to lodge the principle of supremacy in their creed, and in the general mind of Europe, knowing that future ages would fructify and ripen it. Towards this they began to work quietly, yet skillfully and perseveringly. At length came overt and open measures. It was now the year 1073. The papal chair was filled by perhaps the greatest of all the popes, Gregory VII, the noted Hildebrand, daring and ambitious beyond all who had preceded, and beyond most of those who have followed him on the papal throne. Gregory fully grasped the great idea of theocracy. He held that the reign of the Pope was but another name for the reign of God, and he resolved never to rest until that idea had been realized in the subjection of all authority and power, spiritual and temporal, to the chair of Peter. When he drew out, says Janus, the whole system of the papal omnipotence in 27 theses in his Dictatus, these theses were partly mere repetitions and corollaries on the Isidorian decretals. Partly he and his friends sought to give them the appearance of tradition and antiquity by new fictions. We may take the following as samples. The 11th maxim says, the Pope's name is the chief name in the world. The 12th teaches that it is lawful for him to depose emperors. The 18th affirms that his decision is to be withstood by none, but he alone may annul those of all men. The 19th declares that he can be judged by no one. The 25th vests in him the absolute power of deposing and restoring bishops, and the 27th the power of annulling the allegiance of subjects. Such was the gage that Gregory flung down to the kings and nations of the world. We say of the world, for the pontifical supremacy embraced all who dwell upon the earth. Now began the war between the mitre and the empire, Gregory's object in this war being to wrest from the emperors the power of appointing the bishops and the clergy generally, and to assume into his own sole and responsible hands the whole of that intellectual and spiritual machinery by which Christendom was governed. The strife was a bloody one. The mitre, though sustaining occasional reverses, continued nevertheless to gain steadily upon the empire. The spirit of the times helped the priesthood to their struggle with the civil power. The age was superstitious to the core, and though in no wise spiritual, it was very thoroughly ecclesiastical. The Crusades, too, broke the spirit and drained the wealth of the princes, while the growing power and augmenting riches of the clergy cast the balance ever more and more against the state. For a brief space, Gregory VII tasted in his own case the luxury of wielding this more than mortal power. There came a gleam through the awful darkness of the tempest he had raised, not final victory, which was yet a century distant, but its presage. He had the satisfaction of seeing the emperor, Henry IV of Germany, whom he had smitten with excommunication, barefooted and in raiment of sackcloth, waiting 3 days and nights at the castle gates of Cassona, amid the winter drifts, suing for forgiveness. But it was for a moment that Hildebrand stood on this dazzling pinnacle. The fortune of war very quickly turned. Henry, the man whom the Pope had so sorely humiliated, became victor in his turn. Gregory died an exile on the promontory of Salerno, but his successors espoused his project, and strove by wiles, by arms, and by anathemas to reduce the world under the scepter of the papal theocracy. For nearly 2 dismal centuries, the conflict was maintained. How truly melancholy the record of those times! It exhibits to our sorrowing gaze many a stricken field, many an empty throne, many a city sacked, many a spot deluged with blood. But through all this confusion and misery, the idea of Gregory was perseveringly pursued, until at last it was realized, and the mitre was beheld triumphant over the empire. It was the fortune, or the calamity, of Innocent III, 1198 to 1216, to celebrate this great victory. Now it was that the pontifical supremacy reached its full development. One man, one will, again governed the world. It was with a sort of stupefied awe that we look back to the 13th century and see in the foreground of the receding storm of this colossus uprearing itself in the person of Innocent III, on its head all the mitres of the church, and in its hand all the sceptres of the state. In each of the three leading objects which Rome has pursued, says Hallam, independent sovereignty, supremacy over the Christian church, control over the princes of the earth, it was the fortune of this pontiff to conquer. Rome, he says again, inspired during this age all the terror of her ancient name. She was once more mistress of the world, and kings were her vassals. She had fought a great fight, and now she celebrated an unequaled triumph. Innocent appointed all bishops. He summoned to his tribunal all causes, from the gravest affairs of mighty kingdoms to the private concerns of the humble citizen. He claimed all kingdoms as his fiefs, all monarchs as his vassals, and launched with unsparing hand the bolts of excommunication against all who withstood his pontifical will. Hildebrand's idea was now fully realized. The pontifical supremacy was beheld in its plenitude, the plenitude of spiritual power and that of temporal power. It was the noon of the papacy, but the noon of the papacy was the midnight of the world. The grandeur which the papacy now enjoyed, was the jurisdiction it wielded, have received dogmatic expression, and one or two selections will enable it to paint itself as it was seen in its noon. Pope Innocent III affirmed that the pontifical authority so much exceeded the royal power as the sun doth the moon, nor could he find words fitly to describe his own formidable functions, save those of Yahuwah to his prophet Jeremiah. See, I have set thee over the nations and over the kingdoms, to root out and to pull down, and to destroy and to throw down. The church is my spouse. We find the same Pope saying, is not married to me without bringing me something. She hath given me a dowry of a price beyond all price, the plenitude of spiritual things, and the extent of things temporal. The greatness and abundance of both, she hath given me the mitre in token of things spiritual, the crown in token of things temporal, the mitre for the priesthood, and the crown for the kingdom, making me the lieutenant of him who hath written upon his vesture, and on his thigh, the King of kings and the Lord of lords. I enjoy alone the plenitudes of power that others say of me, next to God, and out of his fullness have we received. We declare, says Boniface VIII, in his bull Unum Sanctum, define and pronounce to be necessary to salvation for every human creature to be subject to the Roman pontiff. This subjection is declared by the bull to extend to all affairs. One sword, says the Pope, must be under another, and the temporal authority must be subject to the spiritual power, whence, if the earthly power go astray, it must be judged by the spiritual. Such are a few of the great words which were heard to issue from the Vatican Mount, that new Sinai, which, like the old, encompassed by fiery terrors, had upreared itself in the midst of the astonished and affrighted nations of Christendom. What a contrast between the first and last estate of the pastors of the Roman Church, between the humility and poverty of the first century and the splendor and power in which the 13th century saw them enthroned. This contrast has not escaped the notice of the greatest of Italian poets. Dante, in one of his lightning flashes, has brought it before us. He describes the first pastors of the church as coming barefoot and lean, eating their bread as chance at the first table. And addressing Peter, he says, E'en thou wentest forth in poverty and hunger, to set the goodly plant that, from the vine, it once was, now is grown unsightly bramble. Petrarch dwells repeatedly and with more amplification on the same theme. We quote only the first and last stanzas of his sonnet on the Church of Rome. The fire of wrathful heaven alight, and all thy harlot tresses smite. Base city, thou from humble fare, thy acorns and thy water rose, to greatness rich with others' woes, rejoicing in the ruin thou didst bear. In former days thou wast not laid on down, nor under cooling shade. Thou naked to the wind wast given, and through the sharp and thorny road thy feet without the sandals trod. But now thy life is such it smells to heaven. There is something here out of the ordinary course. We have no desire to detract from the worldly wisdom of the popes. They were, in that respect, the ablest race of rulers the world ever saw. Their enterprise soared as high above the vastest scheme of other potentates and conquerors, as their ostensible means of achieving it fell below theirs. To build such a fabric of dominion upon the gospel, every line of which repudiates and condemns it, to impose it upon the world without an army and without a fleet, to bow the necks not of ignorant peoples only, but of mighty potentates to it, nay, to persuade the latter to assist in establishing a power which they could hardly but foresee would crush themselves, to pursue this scheme through a succession of centuries without once meeting any serious check or repulse. For of the 130 popes between Boniface III, 606, who in partnership with Phocas laid the foundations of the papal grandeur, and Gregory VII, who first realized it, onward through another 2 centuries to Innocent III, 1216, and Boniface VIII, 1303, who at last put the top stone upon it. Not one lost an inch of ground which his predecessor had gained. To do all this, we repeat, something out of the ordinary course. There is nothing like it again in the whole history of the world. This success, continued through 7 centuries, was audaciously interpreted into a proof of the divinity of the papacy. Behold, it has been said, when the throne of Caesar was overturned, or taken out of the way, how the chair of Peter stood erect. Behold, when the barbarous nations rushed like a torrent into Italy, overwhelming laws, extinguishing knowledge, and dissolving society itself, how the ark of the church rode in safety on the flood. Behold, when the victorious host of the Saracen approached the gates of Italy, how they were turned back. Behold, when the mitre waged its great contest with the empire, how it triumphed. Behold, when the Reformation broke out, and it seemed as if the kingdom of the Pope was numbered and finished, how 3 centuries have been added to its sway. Behold, in fine, when revolution broke out in France and swept like a whirlwind over Europe, bearing down thrones and dynasties, how the bark of Peter outlived the storm and rode triumphant above the waves that engulfed apparently stronger structures. Is not this the church of which Christ said, "The gates of hell shall not prevail against it"? To do all this, we repeat, something out of the ordinary course. There's nothing like it again in the whole history of the world. This success continued through 7 centuries. It was audaciously interpreted into a proof of the divinity of the papacy. Behold, it has been said, when the throne of Caesar was overturned, or was taken out of the way, how the chair of Peter stood erect. Behold, when the barbarous nations rushed like a torrent into Italy, overwhelming laws, extinguishing knowledge, and dissolving society itself, how the ark of the church, that is the Church of Rome, rode in safety on the flood. Behold, when the victorious hosts of the Saracen approached the gates of Italy, how they were turned back. Behold, when the mitre waged its great contest with the empires, how it triumphed. Behold, when the Reformation broke out, and it seemed as if the kingdom of the Pope was numbered and finished, how 3 centuries have been added to its sway. Behold, in fine, when revelation broke out in France and swept it like a whirlwind over Europe, bearing down thrones and dynasties, how the bark of Peter outlived the storm and rode triumphant above the waves that engulfed apparently stronger structures. Is not this the church of which Christ said, "The gates of hell shall not prevail against it"? What else do the words of Cardinal Baronius mean? Boasting of a supposed donation of the kingdom of Hungary to the Roman See by Stephen, he says, it fell out by a wonderful providence of God, that at the very time when the Roman Church might appear ready to fall and perish, even then distant kings approached the Apostolic See, which they acknowledge and venerate as the only temple of the universe, and sanctuary of piety, the pillar of truth, the immovable rock. Behold, kings, not from the east as of old, they came to the cradle of Christ, but from the north, led by faith, they humbly approached the cottage of the fisher, the church of Rome herself, offering not only gifts out of their treasures, but bringing even kingdoms to her, and asking kingdoms from her. Whoso is wise and will record these things, even he shall understand the loving kindness of the Lord." Unquote. And that's from Baronius, 1609. But the success of the papacy, when closely examined, is not as surprising as it looks. It cannot be justly pronounced legitimate or fairly won. Rome has ever been swimming with the tide. The evils and passions of society, which a true benefactress would have made it her business to cure, at least to alleviate, Rome has studied rather to foster into strength, that she might be borne to power on the foul current which she herself had created. Amid battles, bloodshed, and confusion has her path lain. The edicts of subservient councils, the forgeries of hireling priests, the arms of craven monarchs, and the thunderbolts of excommunication have never been wanting to open her path. Exploits won by weapons of this sort are what her historians delight to chronicle. These are the victories that constitute her glory. And then there remains yet another and great deduction from the apparent grandeur of her success, in that, after all, it is the success of only a few, a caste, the clergy. For although during her early career the Roman Church rendered certain important services to society, of which it will delight us to make mention in fitting place, When she grew to maturity and was able to develop her real genius, it was felt and acknowledged by all that her principles implied the ruin of all interests save her own, and that there was room in the world for none but herself. If her march, as shown in history down to the 16th century, is ever onwards, it is not less true that behind on her path lies the wrecks of nations and the ashes of literature, of liberty, and of civilization. Nor can we help observe that the career of Rome, with all the fictitious brilliance that encompasses it, is utterly eclipsed when placed beside the silent and sublime progress of the gospel. The later we see winning its way over mighty obstacles solely by the force and sweetness of its own truth. It touches the deep wounds of society only to heal them. It speaks not to awaken, but to hush the rough voice of strife and war. It enlightens, purifies, and blesses men wherever it comes. And it does all this so gently and without boasting. Reviled, it reviles not again. For curses it returns blessings. It unsheathes no sword. It spills no blood. Cast into chains, its victories are as many as were when free, and more glorious, dragged to the stake and burned. From the ashes of the martyr there start up 1,000 confessors, to speed on its career and well the glory of its triumph. Compared with this, how different has been the career of Rome, as different, in fact, as the thundercloud which comes onward, mantling the skies in gloom and scathing the earth with fiery bolts, as different from the morning descending from the mountaintops, scattering around it the silvery light and awakening at its presence songs of joy. And that is the end of chapter 5. When we pick up Thursday in this hour, we will continue with the medieval Protestant witness on chapter 5 of the book first of James A. Wylie's History of Protestantism. Ask you to please go to my website. If you're enjoying the reading of this, go to my website, click on the free ebooks tab, or the free bookstore tab there, and perhaps, let's see, can I bring up my Firefox and close that? Yes, I can. And if you go to my website and click on the homepage there, that's nicklasarthur.wordpress.com. You'll see this free bookstore tab here at the top. Please click on that and go down to the books we are reading. They're at the very bottom. And you'll see the History of Protestantism there. Please click on that. Go there and click on the, to leave a customer review. If you like what you're hearing, that is. And leave a very positive review, I would appreciate it. Or at least give it 5 stars. And if you can give it a written review, we would greatly appreciate that with your thoughts on the things that you're hearing, to let people know what they're in for when they buy these books. These are very popular. They are selling. They're very popular in a very small group of people, but they are selling. And hopefully someday we'll be able to support the work here at First Amendment Radio. They come in 5 volumes. They should be in every library, I think. Let me get over here where I'm bigger, and I can show you. They should be in everybody's library, come in 5 volumes. It looks black on the screen to you and in the pictures, but actually it's a very deep purple cover. And if you're holding it in your hands, it's easy to see the deep purple cover and the color. It's all very expertly formatted. Every word has gone over and is being gone over one more time as I do the audible version here. So if there's any more typos, they will be fixed, but that's what you get. And it comes in 5 volumes with all of the block prints, the original block prints that were in James A. Wylie's original editions are restored to the pages. And there are hundreds, literally hundreds of them. There are at least, I think, like 100 in each of the 5 volumes. So it took quite a bit of time, but I got it done, and now they are all for sale for anyone that's building a Christian, Protestant, or Reformed library. Definite must-have, available both in paperback. I have the paperback here, and hardcover for those that that have more money to spend, or that are going to be handled more for a church library, perhaps, or a pastor's library, or whatever. Anyway, but as I said, this audible version is being published as I produce it on Rumble at the firstamendmentradio.net Rumble page. So make sure you go there, subscribe, listen there live. First Amendment Radio is live 24/7, and these will be in a playlist there when done. So that will be the free version from my free bookstore when it is posted. So take advantage of many of the other books there and the free versions. You'll see these books are grouped. My series, The Revelation Enigma Decoded, in 3 volumes, being The Beast Apocalyptic, An Exposition of the Revelation, and The Millennium Question. You can buy the 3 separate volumes in paperback or hardcover, or you can get them all in one volume. They're The Revelation Enigma Decoded in one volume. These are also available at firstamendmentradio.net. The free audible version is published there, so you take advantage of that. Listen to it while you're at work, while you're doing your mundane chores, or you're traveling, whenever, and you can get all of this Reformed Reformation, Reformed prophecy, and Reformed thought, and review it yourself. And also, like I said, click on it on each book of this series, say, and do leave a review there, what you liked about it, what you didn't like about it, what you heard. If you really enjoy what you're hearing there, make sure that you share that in a written review, or at least give it a 5-star review if you don't want to write anything. Every review helps, and as you can see, we don't have many reviews, but so far in my exposition of the Revelation, I have 9 5-star reviews. Not one complaint about the book at all. So, and even at that, I've sold many more copies than 9. So even when people buy books, they tend to not review them. So I need all the help I can get here. We need all the help we can get here at First Amendment Radio. So make sure you take advantage of the entire bookstore. You'll see a description below each group of books with links where you can listen to or get a free version of it. There's another group of books that I've written myself. So, and then I have the Hore Apocalypticae, the whole 4-volume set there, updated to the 21st century by yours truly, myself, and republished here. So you get everything that E.B. Elliott wrote, plus any updates. So, and we also have a H. Grattan Guinness library. I put the top 4 books there, I believe, are the top 4: Progressive Revelation Interpretation, History Unveiling Prophecy, and Romanism and the Reformation are the top 3 books. And then, of course, Key to the Apocalypse. You don't really need that one because it is everything in it is also in History Unveiling Prophecy. So, or you can buy it. It's very inexpensive, so you can buy it as an aside or whatever. And then, of course, lastly, the History of Protestantism which we're going through. Well, I'm quickly running out of time for this hour, so I want to thank anyone for showing up. Thank you for the few that have acknowledged their presence in the chat room. That's always nice to see, though I'm not engaging with the chat so much. But questions and comments, if I get them, I will answer them, because they usually have a little bit between the end of a paragraph or the end of a chapter or something, and I don't want to just start willy-nilly, so I can address those then. So for today, I will say, may the Almighty bless you and keep you all as you travel on the narrow way that leads to life. I love you all. Thank you for coming. Hi, I'm Nicklas Arthur, and I'd like to introduce you to my latest book, Reformed Prophecy Interpretation, an apology for Reformed premillennial historicism in the 21st century. As with primitive biblical Christianity, historicism is the method of prophecy interpretation restored with the advent of the Protestant Reformation, and had become so widely held that for a long time it was called the Protestant view. My book is not so much about the errors of dispensationalism or amillennialism. Rather, it is about the historicist alternative to understanding many of the same passages from the vantage point of prophecy fulfilled in history. For those that desire more than mere hypotheses, bolstered with conjectured speculation, those who require explicit biblical exegesis and verified historical fulfillment, and are not willing to accept speculation as anything other than what it is, speculation, not truth. This book is for you. Over the last century, this method of interpretation has become almost completely forgotten, even by Protestants, in the face of a method that is based almost entirely on future speculation, rather than fulfilled prophecy in history. In my book, I examine the reasons for this and investigate some of the prophecy which has been fulfilled in the interim, as well as present an apology for Reformed premillennial historicism to the 21st century. If you're interested in a copy of my book, you can go to my website, crosstheborder.org, and get more information there, or you may also find it at Amazon. Be informed, edified, and grow in the faith as your spirit is daily nourished in a biblical worldview, because you love the truth. firstamendmentradio.net/MOPI. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. Always listenable, at work or on the go. firstamendmentradio.net/MOBI. No download or app necessary.